Yeah, from the outset, we wanted a more retro feel to this album, more like Journey to the East, which was our first album, than our last album, The Sea of Broken Vows. Sea of Broken Vows was more computer driven, whereas when we were playing live, it was very analog, more piano. The synthesizer we had then was the Yamaha CS80, Fender Rhodes Mark 1, Mini Moog, that kind of thing in the early days. So this album was going to be driven by those kinds of instruments, more progressive, early progressive rock feel to it. So that worked up to a point, because as we did the demos, I then started filling all the gaps in, and it became obvious by the time we passed the demos on to John that I'd filled all the spaces. It was all used and nobody else could get a word in. So we had to strip the whole thing back to the piano, the drums, the bass guitar, and the lead vocal. And that then opened the whole thing up. And then it was a case of what we were going to use to add in. So we got the analog piano, the Yamaha U3 kind of sound. We got the Fender Rhodes. I had a Fender Rhodes Mark 1, so it was kind of trying to get that sound instead of the Mark 4s that came out later. And then we still had the Hammond C3 that was in the studio. And we used to have a Hammond C3 and we used to play it on stage. In fact, we inherited it. I remember one of the first gigs we did, there was a C3 on the stage. And I said to the guy, can I play this? Can I mic it up and play it? He says, if you can carry it, you can have it. And that's what used to happen. Gear used to get dumped because the road crew refused to carry the things. And they were temperamental. The CS80 was a dirty, great, heavy thing. And temperamental. If you coughed on it, you'd lost all the work you've been doing programming it for hours. So we went out, and one of the first things we did was we bought an Arturia Polybrute, analog, digitally driven override, connectability to a computer, but it was the analog LFOs I was after. And that was great. We could then sit there twiddling knobs, getting the sounds we wanted. And that was the next thing on top of the pianos, was getting the synthesizer on it, then getting the organ work. I had to listen to a lot of old school players because I'm not the world's greatest technician on organ. So listening to people like Stevie Winwood, old Alan Price recordings, people like that who could really play, I suppose, Rick Wakeman as well. All those old school players that played on the old C3s. And eventually I learned that the more I took out, the better it sounded. And we're lucky that we got the C3 still there and linked up to a great Leslie as well. So that formed the basis of the sound for the album, and it left room for the guitars. And also, when we started writing the album, when Mark and I start, we've got the Yamaha U3, and everything's in your head. So all the sounds you're adding in your head, but the keyboard, the piano bit is still there. And then you just kind of fill in the other sounds, the organs. Mellotron was a big thing as well. There's another keyboard that ended up being a pigeon nest in the garden because they used to go in and out of tune, as did the Mini Moog in the old days, and they were temperamental. And when the string machines came out, they took over. The early string machines that were I think Salinas and things like that came out, they were taking over because they were easy to carry and they stayed in tune to a degree. So that's kind of what we were trying to replicate. So what we ended up with really was basic keyboard sounds with some beautiful dreamy synth work coming from the Brute, and then some fabulous Mini Moog sounds that we managed to recreate, and then all backed up by pianos, Fender Rhodes and organ, and it was as simple as that. And then that just gave us the backing for the track, and Peter's bass guitar. And the one thing you don't want to lose is the lead vocal. That needs to shine through. So very, very pleased with the end result. It's Forged by the Sun. It's more attuned to the thinking behind our first album, Journey to the East, than it is to our last album. So, yeah, very pleased.